There are nights at Cheyenne Mountain when the mountain itself seems to breathe. You'd think 1,000 meters of granite would snuff out all sensation, but it doesn't. The air down here tastes of burned plastic and stone dust, and after midnight the temperature drops enough that condensation forms along the conduits, running down in thin rivulets before beading on the tile. Sometimes I think I can feel the weight of every failed early warning, every late alert, pressing in through the bedrock. Sometimes I just blame the coffee. The alert came in at 01:47, long after most of the civilian contractors had abandoned their stations for the day, their chairs left askew as if they'd planned to return in 5 minutes. I was reading the weekly situation report, 4 hours behind and barely absorbing anything, when Saito's voice came from the far end of the ops bay. "Colonel Reeve, I've got something off JWST's back-end buffer. You want eyes on it?" he always asked, even though we both knew I'd say yes. I wiped my palm on my uniform pants, fabric gone rough from too many industrial wash cycles, and crossed to his station, sidestepping a snarl of data cables someone had jury-rigged from the thermal imaging console to the mainframe. Our IT protocols were strict, but everyone broke them. Down here, survival meant improvisation, and sometimes the difference between classified and unsecured was a matter of minutes and nerves. Saito gestured at his display, an array of lines, spikes, and overlays against the sensor grid, so densely marked it looked like someone had scratched code into obsidian. He was younger than me by a decade, sharp in a way that made him enemies. People said he'd been fast-tracked after the Altair containment, one of those stories you never asked about if you valued your clearance. "This isn't a solar flare," he murmured, adjusting the scale with a flick of his stylus. Look at the waveform. You ever see something sustain like that, from a stellar source?" He was right. There was a sharp vertical rise, power climbing like a snapped cable, and then it leveled, holding steady for nearly 40 seconds before vanishing. Most natural events faded on a bell curve. This had edges. "What's the cross-reference?" I asked, because someone had to say it. He tapped another key, overlaying data from the thermal array, the radio array, the magnetometer, everything overlapping in that one ugly spike. If it had been a solar event, the other bands would have lit up in parallel. But here, only the IR stood out, slicing through the background noise like a signal flare fired for the blind. "It's not a ghost," Saito said, voice suddenly subdued. "It registered on every high-gain telescope with a vector on Alpha Centauri B. Multiple confirmations. No comms artifacts, no system lag, no..." He trailed off. The room was silent except for the uneven whir of the filtration fans. One of them always ran slow, like it was thinking about quitting. I could hear my pulse behind my eyes. I leaned in, squinting at the screen. Could be a weapons test, or a fusion detonation. Saito's expression never changed, but I saw his hand clench a fraction tighter around the stylus. "Not at that scale. And there's..." He hesitated, then switched the feed to real time. "I've been running analysis on the post-burst scatter. There's mass movement in orbit, big mass. JWST picked up a secondary event 3 hours later, farther out. See this? That's structural wreckage, Colonel. Except..." He didn't finish the sentence. By 3 o'clock in the morning, I'd looped in 3 more analysts and called Grieg on the secured line. I could picture him in his quarters, sitting up rigid in that battered recliner he'd kept since the wreck, with an old-fashioned sidearm tucked between the cushions, habit from another era. He didn't sound surprised. "Send it up," he said, voice flat as ever. "We'll need confirmation from Space Force comms. No reason to panic yet, Mason." "No, sir," I replied, staring at the live feed as the wreckage field began to drift. There was a pattern to its movement, like something spinning under deliberate control. If this was an accident, it was an orderly one. When I finally stepped outside for air, strictly against protocol, but no one stopped me, the sky above the security perimeter was cloudless, black as graphite. The stars so dense it looked like the universe was bracing for a blackout. I used to find comfort in that view. Now it felt like looking down the barrel of a loaded gun. Inside, the mood shifted. Even the contract janitor moved differently, wheeling his cart past the badge checkpoint with a wary, sideways glance. When I passed the rec room, a pair of off-shift comms officers were arguing quietly over a chessboard, one piece short as usual. They fell silent as I entered, eyes flicking to my uniform, then back to the screen over the door, where news headlines scrolled in a tired, endless loop. Tensions in the South Pacific, record temperatures in Europe, minor system failures blamed on sunspot activity. Nothing about stars in Alpha Centauri. I headed for my office, palming open the security lock, and slid behind my desk. Old reports lined the wall, printed in a half-dozen fonts, signs of changing software, shifting priorities. The small clock on my desk ticked, stubbornly analog, a gift from a friend, now 3 years dead. I let myself breathe for a moment, then scrolled through the raw telemetry. 40 seconds of hell, frozen and translated into columns of numbers. I let my eyes drift, looking for any detail that felt out of place. There, a brief spike in the microwave background. Not enough to register as significant, but enough to make me doubt the baseline. I highlighted it, added a note for later. Saito would want to chase it down. It was nearly 4:30 in the morning when the first image came through, raw, ugly, stitched together by an AI. The object in the photo wasn't a point source or a flare. It was something else. A twisted, irregular arc, its edges jagged where light scattered off protrusions. Shadows pooled along the curve, and for a moment it looked almost architectural, like a bridge or a section of ring, huge, drifting in the void. There was no sense of scale from the image alone, but the metadata told another story. Millions of tons in estimated mass, moving outward at a crawl compared to orbital speeds. I sat back and stared at the display, letting the implications settle in. Whatever this was, it hadn't been flung out by an explosion. It was leaving the system with deliberate, ponderous force. Something big, broken, and moving where nothing should. The rest of the shift bled away in a haze of classified calls and half-finished after-action reviews. I signed off on the priority alert, routed it through 3 layers of encryption, and told Saito to get some sleep. He just looked at me, dark circles under his eyes like he knew it wouldn't matter. By 6 o'clock in the morning, the mountain was waking up. Contractors shuffled in, clutching their ID cards like talismans. Above ground, daylight broke over the Rockies, sharp and gold, throwing long shadows across the valley. Down here, the only light came from monitors and the blue strip running the length of the corridor. I washed my hands in the tiny sink beside the server room, watching the water swirl and vanish into the drain. My reflection in the metal backsplash looked older than I remembered, jaw clenched, hair grayer than last month. I reminded myself, I had a job and there were protocols, orders to follow, lines not to cross. The world wouldn't end on my shift. Still, sleep was out of reach. I went through the motions, uniform off, boots stacked beside the cot, an attempt at brushing my teeth under the buzzing fluorescent in the corner of the small on-base quarters. But my mind kept running back to that broken ring, that arc bent in ways nothing natural could survive. I closed my eyes and saw it projected behind my eyelids. That jagged edge limned in starlight, tumbling so slowly it might as well have been painted in place. When sleep finally came, it was thin and unsatisfying, the kind that leaves you feeling older the moment you wake. I was still half awake when my phone buzzed. The sun had climbed past the edge of the security shutters, spilling the first real warmth of the day across the floor. I watched dust motes drift in the pale light as I dressed. The message was terse, red-lettered, marked urgent. General Grieg. I read it twice, but the meaning was simple. I was wanted at the Pentagon, immediately. Colorado Springs to DC isn't a short hop, but I barely remember the flight. I spent most of it cycling through secure memos, trying to anticipate which version of the truth would be waiting for me on arrival. My fellow passengers, a handful of uniformed Air Force officers, a State Department attaché in a suit that still had the creases from the package, studied their tablets with the same anxious focus. A private with a nervous cough sat beside me, working the clasp of his wristwatch until the band nearly snapped. No one spoke. We all had that look, the one that comes from living inside protocols, always waiting for the next escalation. DC was humid, even this early. The Pentagon loomed through the tinted glass of the convoy van, its lines too sharp, too perfect, as if the building had been engineered for paranoia. Inside, security was tighter than usual. Guards checked our IDs 3 times, eyes darting between my badge and the screen. I was met in the corridor outside the skiff by a woman in a nondescript suit. Her shoes were polished, heels clicking like a metronome. NSA. She gave her name, Mallory, but didn't bother with small talk. I followed her past portraits of greying generals through a maze of numbered doors. Even now, after years of briefings, the Pentagon always felt like a puzzle box, designed to confuse as much as secure. Inside the conference room, Grieg was waiting, shoulders hunched as if bearing invisible weight. His grey hair was cropped short, uniform pressed so tightly it barely creased when he turned. The table was already ringed with familiar faces. Space Force, NORAD, a few from State, and 2 I didn't recognize but didn't need to ask about. Intelligence, black-badged, silent. A pot of coffee sat in the center, already half-drained. Grieg didn't stand on ceremony. "We're on a clock, Mason. You're up." I walked them through the timeline, starting with the initial burst, the 40-second plateau. I kept it clinical, no speculation, just the facts as I'd seen them. Saito's analysis, the secondary event, the emergence of the arc-shaped object. I left out my private sense of dread. Space Force's man, Colonel Davis, cheeks red from either the heat or the stakes, cut in. "If this was a kinetic event, we'd expect fragments scattering at escape velocity. But this thing's not behaving like loose wreckage." I nodded. "It's decelerating, deliberately. Nothing we know in that part of space could cause that kind of controlled change. It's big, too. The scale is challenging." Someone at the end of the table, black badge, expressionless, scribbled something on a notepad. Mallory spoke for the first time. "There's another consideration. The quantum relay array." A quiet ripple passed around the table. Grieg pressed his lips together as if bracing for a shot. I saw his hands, usually so steady, trace a line along the edge of his briefing folder. I'd seen the array in person, months ago, buried beneath Peterson's Space Force base. A sealed room, shielded in layers of synthetic diamond and lead, racks of hardware bristling with cables the width of my forearm. The project was classified beyond my pay grade, but I knew the pitch. Quantum entangled comms, instantaneous signaling to any point with a paired receiver, a dream for diplomats, a nightmare if the other side was listening. "We have an opportunity," Mallory continued. "If the object is engineered, and if it's capable of receiving or broadcasting, we can initiate contact, shape the narrative." Colonel Davis grunted. "And if it's hostile, you want to wave at the unknown." Mallory didn't blink. A first strike could come in many forms, information, intent, or ambiguity. If we do nothing, we give up the initiative. Arguments flared, technical, philosophical, bureaucratic. State wanted to coordinate with international partners. Space Force wanted a show of strength. The intelligence pair offered nothing but silent, appraising glances, as if measuring how long it would take for the room to turn on itself. Grieg tapped the table, and the room fell quiet. "We're at DEFCON 3. Assume every other major power has this on their boards by now. Mason, walk us through possible intent." What could I say that wouldn't sound like fiction? "If it's artificial, it's been damaged, violently. It's not fleeing at maximum velocity, it's maneuvering, but slowly. That suggests purpose, not panic." Davis broke in. "And the timeline? How long until it could interact with anything in system?" I deferred to the latest projections. at current velocity, decades before it crosses the heliopause. But with this kind of mass and the observed deceleration, it could be on a course correction. If it's changing trajectory, that's intent, not drift. A screen on the wall came to life, a low-res feed from the ops center, Saito's report looping as bullet points. Energy signature, mass, velocity, anomalies. I caught a glimpse of the raw image again, and that same chill ran down my spine. Afterward, we were ushered out by rank. I caught Grieg's eye in the hallway. "You believe they'll push for a broadcast?" I asked. He nodded, but didn't slow his stride. "Too many want to be first. It's an old disease. I remember when we were told never to break radio silence back in the 90s. Now we can shout across the stars in a language no one fully trusts." Mallory caught up with me near the exit. Her manner softened, just a fraction. "Colonel, you'll be looped into the comms protocol design. The President wants options. No script yet, but you'll see the drafts." "What about the contingency?" I pressed. "What if it's not alone or not finished?" She just shook her head. "That's your department, Colonel. Tell us what we should fear." Back in the van, I watched the city slide by. All hard lines and glass towers. Everything new since I'd been a cadet. I tried to imagine what it would be like to speak into a quantum mirror, to say the first words not just as a human, but as a species. The stakes weren't abstract. They pressed down on your chest, left you hunting for air. By the time I reached my hotel, the fatigue settled in hard. I forced myself to call Saito. He answered on the third ring, his voice rough. "Anything new?" "Nothing we can share, but watch for any trajectory changes, anything. And Saito, pull the last 24 hours of comms logs. Look for anything, any anomaly. I don't care how small." There was a pause, then a weary laugh. "Sir, you want the haystack or just the needles?" "Both. We can't afford surprises." He grunted acknowledgement and hung up. I sat on the edge of the unfamiliar bed, staring at the bland painting above the headboard, some digital print of a lake I'd never seen. I tried to imagine what lay beyond that arc in the void, what hands or claws or machines had built something so vast and left it shattered. Outside, city lights bled through the curtains, red and blue from a police car down the block, flashes of white from a jet on final approach. I let my mind drift to old protocols, the lines between courage and recklessness, the way power found its own gravity. Before I slept, I thought again of Grieg's hands, tracing the edge of the folder, a gesture as old as any war. A signal sent, a line drawn, the moment just before something answers back. The train back from DC was almost empty. I sat facing the window, one hand flat on my orders packet, the other gripping a cup of coffee that had already gone lukewarm. My reflection stared back at me in the glass. A man caught halfway between resignation and anticipation, uniform rumpled from hours in cramped seats and crowded corridors. I let the scenery blur by. Industrial parks, power lines marching in uneven columns, the sharp blue shadows of the mountains thrown long across the plains. An ache had settled behind my eyes, as if the past 48 hours had wrung out whatever clarity I had left. By the time I stepped back into the ops bay, the energy in the room had changed. There was a tension beneath the surface, a quiet current that ran through conversations in clipped sentences and sidelong glances. Saito was there, hunched over 3 monitors at once, one leg bouncing with nervous energy. He slid a flash drive towards me without a word. "Everything you wanted from the comms logs," he said, voice gravelly. "And then some." I scrolled through the summary he'd prepared. Timestamps, flagged anomalies, a string of odd transmissions cross-referenced against satellite telemetry. Most were explainable. A burst from an aging weatherbird, a corrupted packet from a European telescope, noise from a South American ground station swamped by a thunderstorm. But there, tucked among the expected, was a line that made me stop. A signal, weak but precise, had threaded its way through 3 platforms, its timing a perfect match for the shift in the ark's trajectory. Get me a visual. Saito keyed up the latest feed. The object, the one I'd spent the past day thinking of as a corpse, had altered its path. Instead of drifting outward, it was angling in, ever so slightly. The vector change was tiny, less than a fraction of a degree, but enough to send it on a new course. A course that would intersect with the outermost edge of the Kuiper Belt in a matter of months, not decades. I stared at the readout, each number like a knock on a locked door. Somebody's steering that thing, Saito murmured. I leaned closer, tracing the ark's new path, with the tip of my finger on the screen. Or some thing, I corrected. Across the room, someone swore quietly, snapping a pencil against a desk. There was a heaviness to the air, the kind that makes even routine actions feel weighted. Above the row of monitors, a digital wall clock counted down seconds in jittery red numerals. We looped in the rest of the team for an emergency call. Europe, China, and a silent connection labeled Observer. The voice from Moscow came through first, flat and metallic with a delay that made each statement sound more ominous. The Chinese representative spoke in measured English, never revealing more than absolutely necessary. On our end, Grieg patched in from upstairs, and I could hear the scrape of his chair as he settled. I briefed them. The energy signature, the course correction, the match to the anomalous signal. I kept my own speculation muted, watching for reactions. The Russian asked about propulsion signatures. The Chinese pressed for raw data. I sent it. Protocol be damned. There was no sense in hiding the fact that something in the dark was moving, with a purpose we didn't understand. While the call ran, I found myself watching the team. Saito was chewing his thumbnail, eyes darting between screens. Sergeant Alvarez kept a notebook open, each new detail marked with her careful, looping script. It was the kind of moment that changes people, whether they realize it or not. As the analysts worked, we caught something else. Small, sharp movements radiating away from the main structure. The software flagged them as fragmentary events, but the pattern didn't match any explosion or simple disintegration. Instead, the larger arc was sloughing off chunks at regular intervals, each piece tracing a controlled, diverging path. It looked almost surgical, like a machine breaking itself apart with care. My phone buzzed. Grieg, direct line. Mason, we're updating protocols. High alert. You're on point for response recommendations. I felt my shoulders tighten. How much do they know upstairs? He was silent for a moment. Enough to want options. Too many opinions, not enough facts. You have any? I glanced back at the monitors. If it's an automated system, we're watching it adapt. If it's a ship, it's deploying assets. If it's neither, I have no goddamn idea what comes next. A dry chuckle. That's more honesty than I've heard all week. After we hung up, I drifted to the window overlooking the exterior access road. A fuel truck rumbled by, its tank scuffed, the driver tapping the wheel in time with music I couldn't hear. I watched the clouds shift above the ridgeline, sunlight glinting off the razor wire fence. For a moment, the world felt almost normal. Then the radio at my hip crackled, and the illusion broke. Back in the ops bay, Saito flagged me over. Another shift. It's minor, but now the object's shedding mass more aggressively. I squinted at the data, a cascade of tiny dots, each tagged with velocity and vector. One of them was already on an intercept with a known Kuiper Belt object. It was no longer just adjusting course, it was acting, and fast. Alvarez murmured, "It's ceding the approach, like marking territory." The phrase hung in the air. No one contradicted her. A few hours later, Grieg gathered us in the classified briefing room. The air inside was stale, the table gouged with old scars where someone had dug at the veneer. He looked us over, eyes narrowed, then passed around hard copies, paper, not digital. The top of each sheet was stamped red line in faded block letters. Old protocol, he said, drafted back when we still thought the only thing out there was Russian satellites. If an unknown crosses the outer boundary, doesn't matter if it's a probe or a rock, we respond. Show of force, or more if we have to. I flipped through the sheets, a checklist of contingencies, escalation steps, rules of engagement, comms blackout procedures. No mention of anything like what we were seeing now. "Sir," I said quietly, "none of this covers what happens if it's not just passing by." Grieg's jaw tightened. "Then we adapt, and we make damn sure the right people hear it." Back at my workstation, I watched the trajectory update in real time. Each revision nudged the arrival window closer, shaving off days, then hours. What had seemed distant was now immediate, urgent. My hands hovered over the keyboard, unsure whether to flag another update or just stare, numb, at the unfolding data. The next radar sweep made everything clear. A massive signature, a shadow across the outer system, braked hard as it entered the Kuiper Belt. The plots lit up with new contacts, each moving with careful intent. I sat back, heart knocking hard against my ribs, and realized the universe wasn't just clearing its throat anymore. It was reaching out, and we'd have to answer, ready or not. When the alert came down from NORAD, the hallways grew tense, like a pressure change before a storm. I could feel it in the way voices dropped in the elevator, in the quick sidelong glances between officers, in the constant shuffle of printouts passed hand to hand, never left on a desk for long. Every door was closed, every badge checked twice. My own hands itched with the urge to do something. But the truth was, there were too many eyes now, too many layers between instinct and action. Grieg called a meeting in the crisis suite. 4 walls of grey soundproofing, a window facing the valley, the glass so thick the world outside looked flat. There was no time for pleasantries. Mallory was already there, tablet in hand, her hair pinned back with a matte black clip. Saito hovered near the doorway, clutching a battered legal pad, his thumb wearing a groove in the cardboard. Alvarez typed at her laptop, a stack of paper maps at her elbow. Someone had thought to bring a thermos of coffee, but no one touched it. Grieg started. "We've confirmed what Mason flagged. The main object's entered the Kuiper Belt and is deploying secondary units. Current models suggest an intercept with Neptune's orbit inside 42 hours. We're updating protocols as of now." He flicked his eyes to me. "Colonel Reeve, you're on for response recommendations. Walk us through your options." I didn't have options. I had a handful of worst-case scenarios and a pit in my stomach that wouldn't go away. Still, I forced myself to speak. "At this velocity, any intercept will be brief. If it's mapping or scanning, we could be looking at an autonomous probe network. If it's something more, we have to assume the primary is already observing our transmissions and possibly reading the quantum noise we've been leaking since last year's relay tests." Mallory set down her tablet. "The President wants to know if we can communicate first, shape intent. There's pressure to use the relay. But I need to know, will that put us at risk?" I glanced at Saito, then at the unfamiliar faces around the table. I knew not everyone here had clearance, but nobody stopped me. The quantum relay array isn't just another comms satellite. It's a ground-based system we built under Peterson. Massive, shielded, tuned to entangle particle streams and shoot a signal anywhere with a paired receiver. Instant messaging, even at interstellar distances, as long as the other end can catch the thread. We've been running silent tests for a year now, mostly just handshakes. But every time we light it up, it leaves a trace in the quantum background, like ripples you can't hide. If the object out there is listening for that kind of signature, it already knows a lot more about us than we do about it. Mallory's expression didn't shift. So a deliberate message might look like a greeting, or a challenge, or a beacon, I said quietly. If they're waiting for a reason to answer. Grieg let out a slow breath. And if we do nothing? We're gambling they won't see us as a threat. But the array's already been transmitting test packets for months. Silence isn't really an option anymore. There was a brief, uncomfortable pause. The air felt close, too warm, like too many people had breathed the same air for hours. Alvarez broke it. "Sir, The Russians have already moved a platform into readiness near L4. Chinese comms have gone dark on their lunar station. If we wait, someone else might act first. Saito finally spoke, his words tumbling out. I've been combing the logs. There's an anomaly. When the relay runs, I'm picking up entanglement feedback, not just locally, but on the deep space bands. It's as if the object is already responding to our transmissions before we've sent anything directed. Mallory frowned. What do you mean, responding? Saito bit the inside of his cheek. Some of the packet headers are bouncing, not from human sources. There's a return signature, timing, quantum parity, completely off for terrestrial interference. I imagined, for a moment, the Ark out there. A ruined machine or ship or something else, scanning our signals, decoding our languages, piecing together who we were before we'd even made a conscious move. Grieg's tone hardened. We're at 24 hours to decision. Mallory, you have comms authority. Mason, I want your draft of a contact protocol by 1600. Saito, keep tracing those signal anomalies. Alvarez, prepare an options report for the Joint Chiefs. Everything from silent running to a full-spectrum demonstration. The meeting broke with an efficiency that only fear can muster. I caught Saito in the corridor, pinching the bridge of his nose. You okay? I asked quietly. He shrugged, offering a tired smile. Never wanted to be the guy who flagged first contact on a technicality. Now I can't decide if I should be proud or terrified. We're all both, I said. Listen, don't hold anything back. If you see something you can't explain, bring it to me first, no matter who's in the room. He nodded, the tension in his jaw betraying the cost of that promise. Back at my office, I drafted protocol after protocol, each more useless than the last. What greeting do you send to something that can outthink your entire civilization? The screen glowed with templates. Diplomatic overtures, cryptographic challenges, packets of mathematical constants meant to prove we were rational, peaceful, worthy. Every message felt inadequate, as if I were shouting into a hurricane. Mallory sent a draft for review, her language careful, measured, the sort of calm that comes from knowing you'll never be the first to pay for a mistake. Humanity seeks peaceful exchange with all sentient life. Please confirm intent. The words tasted like tin. I closed my laptop and stared at the framed photo on my desk, a younger me grinning in a windbreaker, rocky mountains sprawling behind. I tried to remember what that person had believed about the future. The memory didn't offer much. Late that afternoon, I met Grieg again, this time in the windowless break room, its vending machine blinking out of order. He sat with his tie loosened, the top button of his shirt undone. A rare crack in the armor. He held a report, the pages pinched between thumb and forefinger. We've got an alternate protocol on the table, he said quietly. Not a greeting. A probe, a hostile payload, masked in a contact packet. The NSA wants to send it. My mouth went dry. A digital weapon. He nodded. Information virus. They say it's non-destructive, meant to probe, not harm. And if they're wrong, I pressed. He didn't answer. A sharp knock at the door. Mallory, already poised as if she'd been waiting for her cue. Decision windows closing. I need your final input, Colonel. I looked between them, the tired general, the poised operative, and felt the pressure settle across my shoulders. Every instinct I had screamed to stall, to delay, but the clock was merciless. I wondered if history would remember these hours as a time of wisdom, or of panic. The thought didn't help. Alone again in my office, I stared at the countdown on my screen, watching the numbers shrink toward 0. Saito messaged me a line of code, a timestamp, and a single word: anomaly. I watched it play out on the deep space feed, that signal, a reply that couldn't have come from any human hand. I thought of the red line documents, the protocols drafted for a different world, a different threat. My finger hovered over the comms link, the choice unfinished. Every option a gamble, every outcome a kind of loss. The sun had set beyond the mountain, turning the sky the color of cooling steel. In the twilight, I waited, knowing that any word I chose would be the first domino. And somewhere far past Neptune, something waited for our answer. The air in the comms room was too dry, almost raw on the back of my throat. I could taste the residue from the soldering iron someone had used to rewire the terminal panel, sharp and metallic, riding over the bitterness of cheap coffee left too long on a hot plate. My pulse thudded in my ear, slow and heavy as I scanned the relay terminal for the last time. A strand of my own hair, fallen from the stress of the last sleepless night, clung to the collar of my uniform. I brushed it away and forced myself to focus on the display. The countdown on the quantum relay console was red now, every digit burning into my eyes. On the far wall, Mallory's team watched me, their posture measured, arms crossed or hands at rest beside sleek, closed laptops. Mallory herself was as impassive as ever, no encouragement, no threat, just waiting for a final signature on history. Saito was in the corner, shifting from foot to foot, lips pressed tight in a line. The general had been called upstairs, and I wondered if that was for my sake or his. I reviewed the packet one last time. It was simple. Mathematical constants, a time-stamped greeting, and a checksum calculated in prime factors that would mean nothing unless the recipient could read human logic. Somewhere in the payload was the hidden NSA program, disguised in a series of algorithmic handshakes. If I paused, if I tried to intervene now, they'd pull me off the project. If I sabotaged the signal, I'd risk a court-martial, maybe more. I thought of Grieg's words. Too many opinions, not enough facts. I was out of options. The cursor blinked. The relay console showed ready, superconductors chilled and locked, the whole system waiting on my authorization. For a moment, it was just me and the low buzz of the cooling fans, a dull, uneven drone that rose and fell as if the machine itself were bracing for what came next. My hand hovered over the key. I pressed down, and the console accepted the input with a mechanical click. A ripple ran through the room, so slight it might have been imagination. Shoulders squared, conversations stopped mid-sentence. The relay's capacitors discharged with a sharp, static snap, and the screen changed to a rolling line of diagnostics. On a side display, I watched the system send out the entangled packet, firing it toward the dark. The transmission was over in less than 2 seconds, the confirmation ping almost anticlimactic. A line of code scrolled across the bottom. Uplink successful. Mallory gave a single nod. Saito let out a breath he'd been holding so long, his knuckles had gone pale around his notepad. For an instant, everything felt lighter. I could almost pretend that we'd done something right, that the worst was behind us. The illusion lasted exactly as long as it took for the first alarm to go off. A red light bloomed at the edge of the main display, a single blinking warning, silent but urgent. The deep space feed updated in real time, the data rolling in with a jitter I'd never seen before. A new signature had appeared in the Kuiper belt, not one, but dozens, then hundreds, each tagged and flagged as unknown. The original arc-shaped object had split, breaking open like a seed pod, scattering fragments across the darkness. Saito scrambled to his console, typing with both hands at once, fingers clattering over the keys. Multiple targets, he managed, voice thin and strained. Velocity is low, no impact trajectory. They're mapping, running a grid. The display filled with new data points, each one tracing a perfect arc across the outer system. I watched the constellation build itself in real time, swarms of microconstructs spreading outward, stitching invisible lines between themselves. It was too coordinated, too intricate to be anything but deliberate. Each node marked a new point of contact, a probe or a beacon or something we didn't have language for. Mallory's phone vibrated once, twice, then again. She ignored it. On the feed, a segment of the cloud shifted, turning toward the inner system as if acknowledging our attention. My mouth went dry. Alvarez, who'd slipped into the back unnoticed, muttered, "We just lit up the whole board." Outside the window, dawn was breaking over the ridgeline. The light was the color of old nickel, dulled and soft. I caught my own reflection in the glass, the lines around my eyes deeper than I remembered, lips bloodless from the way I'd been pressing them together. I wondered if there would be a next time, if there would even be time for regret. A new data burst arrived, radio, optical, infrared all at once. The constructs were transmitting, not in any language we could parse, but in signals that mirrored our own packet structure, bouncing entangled pulses off deep space targets, rewriting the background noise of the solar system in real time. Earth's telescopes caught it first, then the ESA, then Beijing. I watched the news feed scroll as other agencies picked up the pattern. No one spoke English or Russian or Chinese in those moments, just the clipped jargon of disaster. Grieg called from a secure line. "You see it?" "We see it," I said quietly. A pause. I heard him exhale. "We'll get answers, Mason, or we'll get a new set of questions. Either way, it's too late for silence." He hung up. I watched the display as the probes kept multiplying, weaving invisible strands between planets and moons, a net thrown over the sun's children. Some part of me wanted to run, to hide, but I knew better. The universe doesn't wait for us to catch up. I wrote the final entry in my log, the pen shaking in my hand. Above me, the sky brightened to a cold, glassy blue, and I imagined all those new points of light, artificial satellites, slipping quietly into positions where nothing should be. Watchers, heralds, or something else entirely. I pressed my thumb to the paper to steady it, leaving a smudge. In that moment, I understood what it meant to be the first to answer and not know what I had said. The world outside moved on, but nothing would ever be the same. And somewhere, far beyond the orbit of Neptune, the consequences of our message were just beginning to unfold. 6 months later, I'm no longer wearing a uniform. The badge they gave me at the inquiry was red, the kind you hand back when the questioning's done. I keep it in a drawer with my father's watch and a coin from my first overseas posting. The mountain doesn't call for me anymore. The sky, though, never lets me go. A year ago, the world had arguments and summits. Now it has new constellations, thin lines and slow-moving knots of light visible from the streets of every city on clear nights. Kids point at them through the haze, tracking their deliberate paths. The news doesn't call them satellites. The scientists on TV, no longer fringe guests, use phrases like extrastellar artifacts, interdictor mesh, non-terrestrial infrastructure. Every government names them something different, but the fear is universal. Some days, I walk the trails above town, boots crunching on frost, just to see how much the sky has changed. I see the clusters arrange themselves, precise as survey markers. Sometimes an aurora ghosts the horizon, tinted blue-green, even where no aurora should be. Mallory's people have vanished into layers of new agencies, special contingencies, international response cells, the acronyms changing too fast to track. Grieg retired early. The official story is health, but I saw the lines on his face before he disappeared from the briefings. Saito emails sometimes. He's in Europe now, working for a coalition lab in Geneva. Their messages are guarded, more hint than substance, but every one carries the same undertone. We are not in control. The first direct transmission arrived 3 months ago. Not language, at least not in any form we recognized, but a sequence of images, orbital trajectories, magnetic field diagrams, strange geometric shapes that shift in sync with the rhythm of our own comms tests. Each nation claims to have deciphered something. No one shares. The Red Line Protocol is now a global fact, not just a file gathering dust in a vault. There have been protests, panics, new religions. Some say the sky has been seeded with sentinels, others with invitations. I've watched footage of astronauts, Russians, Chinese, Americans, standing together for the first time in a decade. Backs to a camera, eyes turned outward as an arc of moving lights slips across the station viewport. Nobody talks about war anymore. Now the talk is about survival, and about the kind of neighbor you become when someone moves in next door. As for me, I keep my log, the old ritual never lost. I write in a small notebook, lines cramping to the margins, as if words could ward off what's coming. Sometimes late at night I turn on the radio and scroll through the static, listening for patterns that shouldn't be there. Above it all, the mesh thickens, the points of light move and pause, change shape, signal and wait. Some part of me is still waiting for a reply meant for us alone. A phrase, a number, a simple greeting that would make sense of it all. But the world has changed its orbit. Maybe that's all the answer we get. The sky is full of watchers. This time, at least, we're watching back.